Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Sprites of Life podcast. My name is Lucas. I hope you guys are having a great day whenever you are listening to this. Today, we're going to be talking about Pokemon poaching. So, we all know that when you're playing Pokemon, you run into a couple of criminals, either in the games or in the animes or in a lot of the other media. And it's interesting because so much of the poaching that goes on in the Pokemon world does reflect real world poaching seen in our world today. So, this video is going to be talking not just about Pokemon and poaching and its history throughout the games, it's also going to be talking about how it connects to real world poaching and how hopefully in the future, when Pokemon's making new dex entries, maybe they can change some of those to kind of shed light on some of the issues that affect real world animals today. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. And let's talk about what poaching started as, where it originally came from. So back in the day, poaching was basically anytime you're hunting on someone else's land illegally. So when you have people who would go on to hunting on the king's land, the king would have the legal right to kill you because what would end up happening was that you would go ahead and be taking their property and they would see anything on that land as their property. That was where most poaching originally started as. It wasn't as we imagine it today, someone going out to harm an animal just for a little bit of money. Many times it was more for food. So you can see that in artwork all the way back to ancient times to today. Now, in today's world, hunting and fishing are a huge economic boon, not just for the United States, from all over the world. Billions of dollars are generated through legal hunting and fishing. However, when you break some of those rules, that is when we get into poaching territory. And it's not always as extreme as you think. There are a couple of different ways that animals can get poached. Number one, hunting or killing or collecting wildlife listed as endangered under the IUCN, which is the endangered species list. So if you're found hurting these animals in any way, then you're technically poaching. If you go fishing and hunting without a license, then technically you are poaching. I think one of the reasons you get trainer cards in the game is to show that you are licensed to carry 6 mudkips and be ready to go. You're licensed to be able to take care of yourself and that you know the rules of Pokemon battling, as opposed to just some schmuck who just grabs like a Rattata and just tries to rob a bank. You need to be able to have that license to prove that you know what you're doing. Then of course, hunting from a moving vehicle or aircraft, as cool as it sounds, you can't do that one scene from Jurassic Park 2 where you're riding around with like a sniper rifle on the side, hunting down dinosaurs. The same way James can't be riding a giant mecha and shooting at Pokemon to get them to do what he wants them to do. That's technically poaching as well. Um, Taking wildlife from anyone's restricted land. So if you go into the safari zone and start breaking their rules on how to collect Pokemon, then you're poaching. At the same time, if you were to go to somebody else's property and start trying to, attack the squirrels in the tree, that's their land. That's illegal. That's also technically poaching. And the final way that you can be poaching is if you're using any extreme force, machine guns, poison, explosives, snare traps. I mean, if you just start blowing things up, yeah, that's a little excessive. You don't really need to be doing that if you're trying to catch Pokemon. Now, if we're looking at the distinction between a Pokemon trainer and a Pokemon poacher, aside from sicker fashion than any trainer, the Pokemon poachers typically are doing their crimes for a number of different reasons, but you can usually break it down into three. They're either doing it for the food or the body parts, they're either catching them for a specific profit, or they're using excessive force in the path to try and get these Pokemon for whatever other reason. So we'll talk about food and body parts first because we've all thought about eating the Pokemon, even the people who make Pokemon. I mean, look at Appleton. That is literally just a living apple pie. But in the Dex entry, it talks about some of these Pokemon being eaten or harvested in the past. And we've even seen it in one of the most famous generations of the game. In the Pokemon Generation 2, for the first time you're running into Team Rocket, they are illegally harvesting Slowpoke tail. And the reason that's so interesting later on is that we see that you can legally harvest slowpoke tail. Like it's not that they were eating them that was wrong. Apparently, they were just eating them out of season, and that was enough to cause an entire criminal empire to start collapsing. I mean, food and body parts is a big reason for a lot of animals being harmed in our world too. But one of the ones that people forget is that if you're eating animals out of season, such as stone crab, if you're going after them when it's not the right time, you are damaging their ecosystem and the ability for them to reproduce. If you're taking out all the larger ones, that usually means you're going to take out the female that are able to produce the eggs. So it's not always about the extreme. Sometimes it's just eating them at the wrong time. Now, if you're talking about catching them for profit, well, we have a couple of examples of that. So we have the bounty hunters from the anime, and we also have our boy Giovanni. Both of them were catching for profit, but for different means. So, for example, with bounty hunters or mercenaries in our world, a lot of them would be seen doing this for the body parts. Someone has a specific order, you are a poacher, you go out and you get these selected body parts and you ship them over for money. Meanwhile, your Giovanni types are the people who I want this really rare toxic, dangerous, violent Pokemon. It's very hard to get breed. Give it to me. That's basically the people who try and have tigers and other animals as pets. These animals that would be very extreme but are owned by the wealthy. And in the United States, it's surprisingly easy to own a tiger. We'll get to that in the end. Now, excessive force in Pokemon can be pretty fun because you have the bounty hunters, like I said, and at one point there's not even a Pokeball, it's just a petrification beam, which is a Master Ball effectively. Like it just catches them immediately because, I mean, what's it going to do? Fight back? I mean, it's insane as well when you think of all the crazy gadgets Team Rocket has done. Just one of these would be considered excessive. Like, look at that. That is a buzzsaw. That is a taser, missile, multiple grabbers, and a drill. This is so much more work that they didn't need to do because just by doing it, just by showing up with this, it is technically illegal. I mean, eventually you're so far in, you might as well go for it, but it's a bit excessive. Now, when you have a Pokemon trainer card and the Pokeball, that's good. They don't consider that excessive force. But if you're showing up with javelin missiles and a Titan from Titanfall 2 to go ahead and catch a couple of Butterfrees, well, apparently that's going to be illegal and frowned upon. In our world, we run into that excessive force every now and again. So we have poison tipped arrows that are deemed illegal when hunting. And we also have massive gill nets. And how those work is you just have this massive, huge net that really doesn't care what it collects. And so you end up with scenes like this where sharks or other animals have been horribly tangled up, even though they weren't the intended target. In the United States, the biggest reason that sharks are endangered on our side of the world is because of bycatch and overfishing from catching meshes like these, which are illegal. Now, if you're moving forward and you're thinking about poaching, there's always this idea that if you just shoot up all the poachers and remove all the poachers, scenes like this wouldn't happen. People all over the world understand that when it comes to animals getting harmed, they're not happening just because people are mean though. Like the people assume that they're violent sociopaths who are doing this. But a lot of the times when you blame the poacher, it's really the person doing all the buying that's the problem. In Africa, for example, when it comes to rhino horn, if you're paying the poachers are only getting paid $50. Think of how poorly Jesse and James are treated for the job that they're doing. Like in our world, if we want to stop rhino poaching, you stop the people from buying it. You stop the market, you stop the interest. A friend of mine used to say, follow the money. And that's really what happens when it comes to real world poaching. I mean, you could do the same with shark finning and shark fin soup. If you stop the want of people in Asia to consume shark fin soup, then there are more sharks in the ocean. Now, when we get to the Pokemon, that's where things get interesting because in the games, we've had endangered Pokemon. We've had creatures that have been harmed from people over time. And I like how they add that into the dex entries about how some are endangered or how they recovered. I think Pokemon can do more. I think Pokemon can change up some more dex entries and kind of shed light on some of the weirder issues when it comes to poaching. So that kind of goes into the next question. Could they actually do it? Like, what would it look like to shed light on the illegal wildlife trade? And I and my not too humble self have put together a couple of suggestions that Pokemon can steal from. So here's my first choice. I mean, you kind of have to start with a rhino, right? When people think about poaching in Africa, this is the guy. So Here's the one of the original dex entries. Its horn, which rotates like a drill, destroys tall buildings with one strike. It stands on its hind legs, and its brain is well developed. I never liked the idea that they called Rye Horn dumb, but we'll get to that another time. So most people are aware of the ivory trade when it comes to the horn of a rhino. Pop quiz. Does anyone realize what a rhino horn is made out of? I'll give you 3 seconds to think and then shout it at your screen. Time's up. It's keratin, the same stuff as your fingernails or your hair. If you wanted the same medical benefits of a rhino horn, you could eat your toenails, and scientifically speaking, that would get the job done. However, there are many people who put all kinds of different effects onto the rhino horn, everything from curing diseases to aphrodisiacs. It's one of those items that is very much coveted by a lot of people, and there's lots of attention on just how bad this gets. Are literally rhinos in Africa with tracking collars on them to make sure that poachers aren't bothering them. There are people with armed guards making sure you don't hunt them. That is how divisive the market is. People are literally willing to risk their lives to get some of these horns so they can make a few bucks. But if we change it up a little bit, let's see how we can kind of reflect that in the Pokemon game. So let's try this one. Their horns are coveted as symbols of strength and power. Some regions have so few Rhydon left that they are kept guarded from poachers day and night. I think that would be a fun one, very simple one to change, and it would kind of remind people some of the issues that are going on. And don't get me wrong, there are plenty of other Pokemon that have this issue. Black bears in China, different crocodilian species across the world, animals that are seen as symbols of strength or power or healing that are harvested to such an extreme that they are endangered. All right, let's see what else we got down the pipeline, see what we can pull up for you. Okay, now, most people, when you consider poaching, you never consider plants because plants can be poached, sometimes even easier than animals. So let's go ahead and look at Carvana's little dex entry. Uses its tentacles to hang from branches. It looks like a plant when it's not moving. It waits its prey with a mouth wide open. Very typical stuff. One of the things that they kind of forget to mention about Carnivine is that while it is a Venus flytrap, Venus flytraps don't live in trees. They live in soil, very specific soil, found in North and South Carolina. The Venus flytrap is not some crazy plant from Borneo or Indonesia or the middle of the heart of Africa. It is found in the terrible soils located near the coast of the Carolinas. And what's happened is that so many people started collecting them as pets. So many people started taking them because they wanted a cool plant that could eat stuff that it left many areas without these plants anymore. Nowadays, there needs to be protection from people who are just harvesting them. To this day, there are a number of different locations that just don't have Venus flytraps anymore. I believe in South Carolina, they're almost completely wiped out. So let's change it up a little bit. This Pokemon only lived in Unova, but became quite popular around the world. Poaching has led to Carnivine becoming rarer to find on its native soil. And I mean, you could do that for other plants as well. So there are different species of pitcher plant that are also harvested illegally. The people who just take cactuses from other locations, that could be an issue as well. So I think that could be something fun to bring up when it comes to Pokemon. Just some of the different issues you run into aren't involving animals. They're also involving plants and vegetation as well. All right, let's see what else we got down the pipe for you. Yeah, it's not a Pokemon video without bringing up Infernape. No, this isn't like a fake out, I promise. So, the heal Pokemon, when its fighting spirit is set alight, the flames around its waist become especially intense. Now, as universally loved and feared as Incineroar is, I don't think enough attention is put on the fact that it is a tiger, or at least tiger adjacent. And tigers are a subject of two different forms of poaching. There are those who poach them because they want to show off how strong they are, they want to show off the fur, the fang. And then there's the poaching of trying to raise them in human care as some extreme form of pet. If you look in the wild today, even the highest population assessments are only 5,578. In the United States alone, There's around that many, if not more, tigers just in the US alone. If you want to go ahead and pull up a map, you could actually see the different areas where you're legally allowed to own tigers. So let's go ahead and change things up then. This proud Pokemon is famous for its fighting spirit. Many trainers come to Alola to take them back to their own region, leaving only a few remaining on the island. So the idea of everyone going to Alola not just for the Sun Beach and Mantine surfing, but for grabbing Littens in order to make Incineroars and take them out. Not only did that tie really well into the reality of it, but it also kind of ties into the competitive scene and just how many teams want an Incineroar whenever they get the chance to do so. The last group of animals I'm going to talk about. Well, first off, if you look at these ones right here, these are all animals people try raising as pets. Things like orangutans and other primates and different rare parrots. But there is one last group I kind of wanted to talk about because they also get a little bit forgotten as well. So let's go ahead and talk about Horsey. No one ever thinks about Horsey anymore, and I feel that's a crying shame. He's a cute little guy. So the dragon Pokemon Horsey eats small insects and moss off rocks. If the ocean currents turn fast, this Pokemon anchors itself by wrapping its tail around rocks or coral to prevent being washed away. Honestly, aside from the eating small insects and moss thing, not bad. I mean, they do mainly eat shrimp in real life, but this is actually a lot closer than I would expected from this an early Gen 1 Pokemon. But seahorses are also poached. They are seen as medicinal, so people will take them and grind them up. Another thing that tends to happen to them is they get overfished on accident by shrimping boats when people aren't careful. So if we're going to change things up for Horsey, let's try something a little different. In the past, people of Kanto believed that Horsey tail could cure anything. This led to this Pokemon being hard to come by to this day. So this is another case of people exploiting, but instead of going out into the land, we're going out into the ocean. So there's so many different animals in the ocean that are also overexploited and poached. So we have whale hunting that can be deemed as poaching depending on what laws you're breaking. Honestly, I view it as poaching in most cases in the world, but it all depends on the legal issues. You'll have overexploitation of shellfish and getting them out of season. And then, of course, you'll have seahorses being completely over harvested and ripped out of their ecosystem for a medicine that is not deemed to be scientifically valid. So, all this kind of just goes into just how interesting they've been able to connect these two very different things. This crazy video game about catching monsters and real world poaching. They've accidentally been able to tie them pretty closely together. And as we're wrapping up, I kind of want to give you guys a little bit of homework when it comes to poaching, just some things to kind of think about. Number one, if you're going out hunting or fishing, follow the rules. They're not there to make things annoying. They're there to make sure that these animals are still around for you to hunt and fish. I'm not telling you that hunting is fantastic or fishing is terrible or any of that. I'm just asking whatever hobby you choose to do, especially with the outdoors, please follow the rules. Also, I want you to focus on the source. Whenever you think about poaching in any capacity, don't just think about what is bringing them here. Focus on why this organism is here. What is it that is driving people to collect them and bring them to different areas or harvest them? Once you find those problems, it's a lot easier to tackle. Now, I will say you can't go to another country and tell people what they're doing is wrong. I am the son of immigrants living in the United States. I can tell you from experience, nobody likes it when Americans go in and tell you what to do. But it's important to know where you're coming from so you can start focusing on those problems. Incidentally, support the groups that are actually fighting that fight. There are a ton of organizations out there that are dedicated to finding the resources to help out conservation. There are so many different organizations that don't just, throw money at it, but will work with locals in the community to try and help things out. I mean, the last thing I'm going to leave you on though is this post. The fact that in the Pokemon game, someone kept breeding Laprases over and over again, and then in the games, they kind of just changed it up to make sure that Laprases came back from extinction. I don't know if they read that post and did it, but I like to think that they did. I like to think that Pokemon would care enough to just change a few dex entries. Nothing in the game else needs to change, but those little dex entries can have a massive impact. And it really does feel good to see these sorts of things happen. And that's all I got for this video, but I really appreciate y'all taking the time and listening, y'all taking the time to watching. If you guys want to connect, if you guys have comments, please leave them down below. If you want to check us out on Discord or our other stuff, please do. On behalf of myself and the rest of my team, have a wonderful rest of your day or night. Hopefully, we catch you all in another episode. Bye, everybody.